So, welcome. It's a great pleasure to have Eduardo Sontag here for my interview. Eduardo is a distinguished professor at Northeastern University.
Correct. My name is obviously Eduardo Sontag. I guess you'll be asking me later about my background.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm a professor at Northeastern University in the departments of electrical and computer engineering and of bioengineering, but also with appointments in mathematics and in chemical engineering. And also I'm in the faculty of the Institute for Therapeutics at Harvard Medical School and an associate member of the Laboratory for Information and Decision Systems at MIT.
Oh, wow, this sounds really cool.
Yeah, well, they don't pay me anything in all those other places.
Yes,
It's just
but the contacts,
Northeastern
right?
one is the ones that, yes.
Contacts are important.
Right.
Yeah. So Eduardo is well known in general, many areas of math biology, and you told me your interests go far beyond cancer modeling.
Correct.
So, what did you get you interested in mathematical biology or biological or medical problems?
So can I go back a little bit?
Yeah.
So I would say from the time that I was in high school, I was certainly interested in mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
I went to study in Argentina. I was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, out of European parents. I was very interested in mathematics at the time. I went to study physics and mathematics, actually, at the University of Buenos Aires. I actually got disappointed with physics very fast.
Okay.
And the reason was a stupid reason, was that I did not see any kind of axiomatic way of understanding the field. And I like to think very logically. And I said, well, what are these concepts? What do they really mean? So in a sense, in retrospect, it was silly. I should understand that science is not axiomatic. That's mathematics, but not science.
I'm sure you use lots of physical principles now, right?
And now I do. But during the time I was studying, I actually was lucky enough to totally accidentally, and I think one of the topics in my life has been how things happen accidentally. So I just happened to walk into a classroom to study. This classroom was almost empty, so I figured I'll use it to study. And there were people talking about a field called computer science.
Uh-huh.
And nobody knew what this was. We're talking about the year 1969 or so.
Okay.
And then I said, well, what are you talking about? And they told me they were interested in this thing called artificial intelligence. So I joined this research group on artificial intelligence. We actually did a lot of interesting things, I think, at the time. We were looking at, of course, at the time, there were no deep neural networks, but people had perceptrons, which were modeled on the idea very roughly of the brain. Rosenblatt had been working on these things. And so we looked at how would you train a neural network to play some simple games. Actually, we did a little tic-tac-toe game that we were having the network learn, simulated on a very slow computer at the time. So we were working on those things, and that got me interested in a little bit on neuroscience. So I ended up teaming up with somebody else, and we wrote a book about artificial intelligence, but seen from the point of view of both neuroscience, but also ideas of dynamics. So one of the things that really caught my attention at the time was the idea of feedbacks and regulation and homeostasis and so forth, and definitely, of course, read Wiener and cybernetics and so forth. So I got really interested in these kinds of ideas, and sort of that led me to think about a career in that. I actually applied for graduate school. I wanted to come to the United States, so I applied to study artificial intelligence with Marvin Minsky. I actually got admitted to MIT to go work with him, but in the meantime, my life took a little bit of a detour because I was, again, accidentally, I had to write a sort of, the degree in Argentina is called licenciado, which is like a master's thesis more than a bachelor's degree, and you do that directly. Part of what you have to do is write a little trabajo de licenciatura, it's called, which is like a master's thesis.
Yes, okay.
And another coincidence in life, I happened to be walking in the library and I saw this book called Topics in Mathematical Systems Theory, written by Kalman, Falb, and Arbib. You probably know Arbib from Theory of Automata and the Brain and so forth. And Kalman of Kalman filters fame. And I didn't know about any of these people, but I saw the book. I thought it was very interesting because it merged some interesting mathematics with things that in principle were applicable in engineering as well as biology and many other fields. So a professor of mine that I was taking a partial differential equations course with, Ettore Fattorini, who eventually went to UCLA. And he was sort of interested in marginally control theory. He met Kalman at a conference, and Kalman was moving from Stanford to the University of Florida. He was known to be a very difficult personality. He had a lot of trouble with people in Stanford.
See, interesting.
Yeah, okay. There's a lot of stories about him. So to this day, people ask me, wow, you were a student of Kalman, tell me stories. And I actually wrote an article about stories about him. Okay. No, it's very, quite interesting. Kalman said, hey, I'm going to be moving to University of Florida. They gave me this incredible position, super high salary, no teaching, and they give me all this money for graduate students. Do you have anybody to suggest? And I said, oh, I have this guy. So I wrote. Nice. He wrote to Kalman. Kalman was quite impressed that an undergraduate had a book published already. So that was, even though it wasn't in control theory. So he gave me a very nice offer. So I ended up going there instead of going to MIT. So
I see. So you worked with Kalman directly.
I worked directly with Kalman. I was his student, and I, to this day, I ask myself, should have gone to MIT, and I think that's an interesting discussion. I think about that too. I mean, I think maybe it was a mistake not going. But in any case, I went to study with Kalman, did a very theoretical thesis in control theory.
Yeah, but we haven't talked about biology yet.
Well, we'll get there.
We'll get there.
So we'll get there. So, patience. But all these things are very related to questions that are very important in biology as well. Right? Mm-hmm. Identifiability, of course, of parameters is a very important question.
Right. Yeah.
So basically, during many years, I developed what I would consider to be foundational notions in control theory. They get applied in mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, biomedical engineering, industrial engineering, economics, whatever. People cite these concepts that I've used. But I still was interested in these questions of brain theory.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So I kept that in my mind. And a number of things happened. I decided to it. So you asked me about physics, so we get back to physics. So at that point, my kids were finishing high school, and I said, I need to learn biology, because what I learned about biology, I heard about DNA in 1959 or 1960. Right. The teachers mentioned something in elementary school, and since then I hadn't heard anything else. So I asked my kids for their books, their biology books. Okay. I opened the biology book, and I said, oh, I don't know enough chemistry. So I said, can I borrow your chemistry books? So I got it. I looked at the chemistry books, and I said, oh, shoot, I don't know enough physics, because biology is chemistry is physics. Of course, physics is mathematics, although some people may disagree with that. But anyway, at that point, I gave up, and I said, I'm not going to be able to learn biology this way. It's like taking the Encyclopedia Britannica and starting with the letter A. You can't do that.
Yeah, right.
So what I decided was, I said, I'm going to start working on problems. I'll see what's interesting problems, and I learn the biology as I go. And at that point, Leah Keshet was organizing a 3-week workshop in Vancouver at UBC on teaching systems biology. And it was for junior people, students, young professors, and I wrote to her and said, I would like to attend. Yeah. And she said, well, it's for junior people. I said, well, I'm junior. I'm just starting to work in this field. So, at that time I was 50 years old.
Oh, I see.
49. And so anyway, grumbled a little bit, but she said, sure. So I went. Okay. I spent 3 weeks at this workshop. There were many, many interesting lectures, but probably the one by Carla Woofsy. I don't know if you've met Carla. So fantastic person. She died, unfortunately, a couple of years later, I think of cancer. So Carla gave a beautiful lecture about the kinetic proofreading model for T-cell recognition. So kinetic proofreading is something that goes back to Hopfield in the context more of DNA repair mechanisms and fidelity of copying and so forth, and has to do with the fact that if you don't, what was pointed out is that if you don't use energy in some way, you're never going to be able to do something, to resolve, say, in the case of T cells, what is the difference between self and non-self? There's just too little difference energetically in the binding binding and unbinding rates between self and foreign antigens. So that led to this kinetic proofreading model that has to do with the succession of phosphorylation, dephosphorylations of receptors. And she gave this talk. It was a beautiful talk. And I asked, well, has anybody proved mathematically, it's nice simulations, and it proved mathematically that this is stable, et cetera. And she said, no, and that would be an interesting problem. So that got me into what is called the theory of chemical reaction networks, which has basically taken the last 24 years. It was the year 2000 or so. I wrote one paper on that. I discovered the theory of deficiency zero weakly reversible networks, what are called complex balance systems, which are not detail balance, they consume energy. And this is the basis of a lot of the work, including the work of Horn and Jackson and the work of Feinberg, beautiful results that had been obtained many years before. I learned all this and I started rewriting it in my own way, applying it to a number of examples in biology. So I got interested in sort of the mathematical basis of understanding how you analyze the systems. And then a couple of years later, Stas Schwartzman, I don't know if you know Stas, and he asked to meet with me because he had heard about my work in control theory. And he said, look, there are these things called MAP kinase cascades. And I asked him to explain to me even why it's called mitogen activated and whatever, and why is this important. And we don't understand this autocrine and paracrine feedback loops, and how do we understand something about the behavior of the systems. He led me to the work of Boris Korodenko, with whom I ended up actually co-authoring the paper that introduced this modular response analysis technique, which gets used quite a lot now. But also in trying to understand his questions, I was led to the development of what was called the theory of monotone systems with inputs, which in turn now has been used in many, many areas of biology.
Oh, fantastic.
So it was really direct, but in every case, I had to learn about immunology, T-cell receptors, MHC presentation, and so forth for the first one. For the second one, I had to learn about kinases. I had no idea what they were. I had to learn about protein structure. So, and so on and so forth. I ended up through a number of these kinds of things where every time I would see an interesting problem, I would say, okay, let me understand the biology behind it. Let me understand what are the real questions. And another big influence, huge influence, was Jim Farrell. I don't know if you know Jim. So I met him at an Aspen Institute of Physics, also 2 or 3 week workshop. And he posed to me some questions that had to do with cell cycle. So that led to our paper on molecular systems biology on cell cycle, which actually was sort of simultaneous with the work of Tyson on the same sort of thing, and both got published at the same time. And again, there were questions of understanding some of the things that were being seen in experiments and having to explain them, in this case having to do with some bifurcation work, bifurcation behavior, some hysteresis behavior. And so that led to a beautiful collaboration, as far as I'm concerned. That paper actually is one of my most cited papers now. And then with him, we also worked on this monotone systems, and had this paper that also has a few thousand, more than 1,000 citations on monotone systems applied to cell
So what I hear from your history a little bit is that you take a biological problems, but you are interested to formulate it in mathematical terms and see what is the real structure behind it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So
it's fascinating.
Right. So I have no problem. In fact, I admire people who write these big models and agent-based models or whatever to really get us something where a lot of complexity can be understood through simple rules. Okay, in a sense of Wolfram's, that's a little too much, but okay. But so that I appreciate a lot. I think my strengths personally are more in thinking conceptually. So I like to look at a system and simplify it as much as possible and think, what is the key thing that makes this work?
The key thing, right?
The key thing underlying it in an explainable way, where the parameters, they're phenomenological, of course, if you're dealing with a hugely complicated system, but at least you have some idea what this means. So that's my, what I like to do. Also, I enjoy tremendously finding connections between different fields. So I may be hearing something, working in immunology, But then I realized that this is exactly the same behavior that I have, say, in bacterial sensing.
All right.
And
okay.
then
Yeah.
drilling down and saying, oh, this is the kind of, circuit or motif that is
Nice.
sort
okay.
of common
Very
to
good.
both, and that sort of lets you think in a certain way. So, and that's what I've done in control theory as well. And I should mention, just to complete that another big area of my research for the last 15, 20 years has been synthetic biology, where we want to build circuits in cells to be
okay.
able to implement various computations. So I work with experimentalists, also do theoretical work on this.
Oh, that's interesting
a whole
too.
other
Yeah.
area. That,
Oh, very nice. Yeah.
So
Now,
cancer, yes.
Yeah, let's come back to cancer now.
Yes,
So
yes.
we are
Sorry
here
for
at
the long
this
excursion. Yes.
thematic program on cancer research, etc.
First of all, let me say that one reason I got interested in cancer is unfortunate. My wife was diagnosed with multiple myeloma.
Oh, I'm sorry.
At must be around the year 2010 or so, 2012.
Okay.
And then I said, well, I had been ignoring cancer because it's too hard. And multiple myeloma is, of course, an immune
Yes.
cancer.
Yeah.
It's a B cell cancer. So, but immunology is even worse. I always used to think that the hardest thing to study is the brain. And that is probably still true, but I think the immune system is out
Yes,
there.
I think it's.
And of course, the
complicated.
interactions between the immune system and cancer are huge. So as
Yes.
we've been seeing in these workshops. So, so I had been avoiding this topic. But at that point, I said, I really need to understand this. So I got into, unfortunately, she passed in the year 2017.
I'm very sorry.
Yeah, thank you. But, it's interesting because my daughter works in a nonprofit that has to do with developing cancer therapies, and she was also very motivated by my wife, her mother.
Of course,
yeah.
of course. Yeah.
And my son also has, his research is in AI applied in health, and was also very motivated
Yes.
to work in this direction. So, so it became a family thing to work in.
Which makes a lot of
cancer.
sense, of course.
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense.
So I like the kinds of things that I see when people write complicated models that seem to represent reality. I worry a lot about, this is my own personal thing, I'm a very
that's
opinionated
fine.
person, you don't have to agree, but I do worry a lot that a lot of the work says, okay, we have this mathematical model, and the mathematical model shows, I don't know, tumor cell infiltrations on the periphery, or shows, in other, in pattern formation, so a certain type of pattern, okay? And then people tend to say, or seem to say, now we understand it because this cellular automaton or this partial differential equation or this agent-based model produced this, therefore, this is what's happening.
Yeah.
And of course, not of course, in my view, that is not the right way to think. Yes, this is a potential way it could happen, but maybe there's a zillion other models will come up that produce the same behavior. So I'm critical in that sense. I think that just coming up with something that explains phenomenologically and qualitatively the data doesn't mean, and even sometimes fitting parameters, getting, if you have 1,000 parameters, you might be able to fit your experimental data, is not necessarily an explanation.
Right. Yeah. That's a very good comment. Yeah.
Yeah. That said, sometimes there are phenomena that look extremely complicated. And you may say, wow, how could this ever happen? There must be intelligence in this system. How could it happen? And then you come up with very simple rules in a cellular automaton, for example, that produces this. At least it's telling you that it's possible to generate this complexity with a simple system.
From
Maybe
these
it's not the
rules,
right simple system,
Yeah.
but at least it shows that you don't need to appeal to some hugely complicated thing. So I would say the value is in suggesting experiments.
Yeah.
Because the one thing I find a lot talking to biologists is they say, well, could you tell me what's the next experiment I should do? And I think mathematical biology, mathematical oncology in particular, that's one of the roles, is suggesting what the next experiment should be.
Yeah. If we can get to that stage, it's really good. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we are there. I mean, we've seen this in seminars that we
that's
watched
right,
where
yeah,
people say,
yeah.
And then the other area that I find particularly interesting, perhaps because of my being a control freak, a control theorist, is that there is, if we have a model that is reasonable, we can ask questions of optimal control. We can ask if I'm allowed to vary my doses according to some schedule. But I don't want to say in advance what the schedule is going to be. Mathematics will tell me if I think of the right objective, like minimizing cancer burden at 100 days or whatever, okay? Then I have a well-defined mathematical problem for that particular model and those particular parameters, and I could come up with some strategy for how to optimally deal. But it can lead to, then you need to test it, right? You need to see, does this really work?
Yeah.
So, do I get better results by using this mathematically suggested optimal strategy of dosing compared to what I was doing before? And this is especially important in things like adaptive therapies. So I think that what I've been very happy seeing, especially in these workshops, is the clinical trials going on for adaptive therapies. I think that's really exciting.
That's the right way to do it, yeah.
Well, that could be other things, but I'm saying that's an example of where I see the mathematics having a direct influence.
So let's talk about the young generation. So you work
a
lot.
I'm young, so don't.
We are both young.
Yeah, we're both young, yeah.
But you work with essentially a
yes.
generation of postdocs and students, grad
yes.
students, etc. So if a young person wants to enter this area, what would you recommend?
Yeah, it's a really hard question because I face that with students all the time. So for mathematics students, mathematics departments, most of them really want to do mathematics with a capital M, meaning they want you to do some good differential topology or, commutative algebra or number theory or whatever. So if you want to choose the route of academia in a mathematics department, and there's also what are called applied mathematics departments, which are sort of in between, sometimes in engineering schools. Then you need to do something that will impress mathematicians. You need to solve some interesting mathematical problems. So what I've done with my students, to go back to your question, when I was at Rutgers, I was in the mathematics department primarily. I also was in an interdisciplinary program. I had some interdisciplinary students as well. But in the mathematics department, I would give them real mathematical questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a mathematical problem. Can we develop a theory of interactions of these dynamical systems, use some differential geometry if needed, or some partial differential equations and prove interesting theorems, whatever. And I don't think that kind of mathematics gets applied in biology. I think it's the concepts that get applied. I don't think you see too many theorems getting applied in biology, or for that matter in any field. I asked them to also work on a project that is more applied. So find a biologist to talk to, or maybe just suggest to them, do something that involves a little more modeling, simulation, things of that sort, so that they find it interesting. And they can also market themselves. If they go to an interview, they can talk about their math, but they can also say, oh, by the way, I've also done this thing. So then,
it's also relevant for this and this.
It's relevant for this and that. But in a real way, not in the sense of, I study partial differential equations, and I do all these theorems on existence and uniqueness. And by the way, PDEs are also interesting in biology. That, has to be a little bit more direct, right? So, and it's not necessarily the same. I mean, the math could be in one topic, and the biology application could be different. But at least to have this. So now, if you're going to go to, industry, a bunch of my students, postdocs, have been going to pharmaceutical industry, where they do things like pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamic modeling, which is really just differential equations. There's not much to it, but they need to understand a little bit of the ideas of dynamics, right?
Yes, right.
So that's a different career path.
And then also this collaborative work, right, which you mentioned, would be important.
Collaborative work is important for all those things. So I think it depends. Again, it depends what you're going to be doing in your life. I think that's really important to ask that question. There's no, one size fits all in terms of advising students.
Yeah, right.
I don't know what you think about that.
No, I fully agree, actually. I pretty much agree, yeah. Also that students who want to have a career in math, they need to publish in math journals.
In math journals, right? Absolutely. So, which is what I've insisted,
At least a few of the papers should be in
100%. 100%. That's actually what I mean, there's some journals in engineering that are very theoretical. So, what's a math journal? But let's say SciAm.
Right, yeah,
science journals. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, great, Eduardo. This was fantastic. Lots of information. Thank you a lot for having time to do this interview.
Sure, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for organizing this amazing workshops. This is really great.
These workshops are really great. Yeah.
Oh, no, it's fantastic. I've learned so much. I talked to amazing people. And, the downside is that my plate is so full of projects. And now every day I come up with 5 more projects that I like to work on. So that's a bad part of it.